Cheshire, England. In a waterlogged marsh, a gruesome prehistoric mystery. Stuff of legend. Warriors, champions, the strangers called Celtoi. They lived in their own epics and they died in them. The technicolored impression we have of the word Celt came from that new and savage superiority over their contemporaries north of the Alps. This now was a primary Iron Age people, whose weapons cut deeper, lasted longer. The use of iron enabled them to raid and slaughter and defend, to achieve fearsome reputations, and to control their subjects, even in death. One of their diversions involved playing with death. Several ancient writers described how the Celts sometimes engage in single combat at dinner. Assembling in arms, they have a mock battle drill and a mutual thrust and parry. But sometimes wounds are inflicted, and the irritation caused by this may even lead to the slaying of the opponent unless the bystanders hold them back. In most cases, though, it was show, young lions sharpening their claws.
The Celts that we read about...
It had lasted some 400 years. It had imposed its authority, its organization, its bureaucracy. It had destroyed the ancient Celtic society, forced the Celtic tribes to conform. And then, when the Roman Empire collapsed, and so suddenly, vacuum. The people who lived where the Romans had ruled were still technically citizens of Rome. Now they had no substance, no real identity of their own. Rome had at least given protection and order and stability. After the Roman withdrawal, a large area of Western Europe became a shell, a political, cultural husk. Arthur, whose sword was the mighty Excalibur, whose spirit sprang out of the wild cliffs of Cornwall. Arthur of Tintagel, he and his kingdom of Camelot have long since been turned to historical romance. His legends are cornerstones of European literature. His fabled tomb in Glastonbury Abbey still excites controversy. Arthurian mythology probably had some foundations in fact. These new forms and images included the ancient reverence for beasts. The very core of Celtic mythology was a recognition, an acceptance of the supernatural in all corners of nature, so that creatures, too, were invested with mystery and power. They were identified, given names, made familiar. Cernunnos was the chief of all the animals, and the Morrigan was capable of shifting herself into a dozen different shapes, for good or for evil. buy them off.
They sacrificed the temple by burning it to the gods.
In the groves throughout Europe where they worshipped, other mysterious practices occurred. They built shrines to venerate the head. This two-headed figure stands on Bow Island in County Fermanagh. The Celts believed the head was the home of the soul, that all power and energy came from there, that the head still had potency even when severed from the body. The cult of the severed head recurs again and again in Celtic belief, in the stories, in the legends, in the mythologies. The carvings reflect the grimness of the cult, as evidenced in shrines like Rochpertus. The Celts decapitated their enemies, carried their heads home in triumph, in the belief that once you had severed and enshrined an enemy's head, his spirit was vanquished too. This is the stone that roared out under the rightful king. Away to the north of Tara, Tory Island off Donegal was another breeding ground for gods and heroes. In his prison here, the awful Balor of the one baleful eye incarcerated his beautiful daughter Ethna, and so paved the way for a new and important mythological figure, the god who was also a man. Isn't it strange? The comparison is probably unfair. Much of what they buried was deliberately brilliant, objects whose beauty and ingenuity were meant to add luster to a ritual such as burial. But the inspiration to make even mundane domestic objects beautiful as well as practical set the Celts a world apart. The discoveries at La Tène in 1858 changed the world's understanding of the word Celt. The archaeologists came to the conclusion that the La Tène find was not a grave or a huge sacrificial offering, but that it contained the relics of a Celtic dwelling place. The objects found in such profusion in the waters of Lake Neuchâtel acquired a much more profound meaning. They became more than a mere archaeological reference point. The words La Tène came to indicate not just artifacts of great beauty made with advanced skill, but literally a definition of an art style. The concerns expressed in the legends are those which appeal to all humanity, and each myth has in it stock elements. It can be heroism, or intrigue, or competition, or magic, or death. Myths such as the wooing of Atene, in which her husband the king and her magical lover Medea play a series of board games to compete for the queen's honour, such situations have recurred time and again. The legends of the Celts have had a profound and enduring effect upon European literature. Did you know that Irish soda bread is good for the complexion? And did you know that if you catch a leprechaun, you must never take your eyes off him, because he will lead you to the end of the rainbow, and there you will find a pot of gold. And for many, it is literally a pot of gold. Celtic tradition has been manipulated and distorted into a souvenir culture. Ancient legends and heroic deeds, romantic tales, all of these get turned into tourist attractions. Take Tintagel in Cornwall, for instance, associated with Merlin and Arthur. Tintagel has all the ingredients: an ancient castle, a rugged shore, a perfect stop for the tourist bandwagon.
And the proud part of Gaeldom.
But there are, however, powerful prejudices at work. To some people, the very word Celt suggests a comic cuts race, red-faced and red-headed, wild and devious. The Celts are argumentative, aren't they? And feckless. And yes, they have a certain rough charm, but aren't they always fighting among themselves? Especially when they've been drinking. The bull was one of the most significant symbols of the ancient European Celts, useful agriculturally, potent mythologically. Now, here, he's blindfolded and tied, commanded and humiliated by the will of others, a helpless hostage to fortune, powerless, pathetic even. But he remains a part of the legacy. His presence, and the presence of all animals in Celtic art, in Celtic metalworking, in Celtic expression, evokes the vital connection between the Celts and the natural world. The mystical relationship between the Celts and their environment was always a dominant feature of their culture.
There is something.
In this intimate, domestic world, another legacy lingers on. In the houses of the countryside, they still delight in colourful talk.
Might part the hair on the head of his love. I have seen them rub their fingers up and down through the grass as if they were massaging the nape of the neck of a beautiful woman. This affection is not an evil thing, or it's not an animal thing. It's a beautiful thing, because it means that the man in question, understands his land, and he loves his land.
The land sustained their culture. Their heroes strode the mountains. Their gods were countryside gods who dwelt in wood and in water. In their land they found their art, their legends, their beliefs. Now long dispossessed, there was only one direction in which the Celts could go: to another world, the world of the imagination, where their most enduring legacy will be found.